Hello, welcome to the Design Disruption. In this series, we've been looking for new ideas in order to use this crisis as a unique moment in our history to build back better. The disruptions that we are witnessing in economics, politics, and our everyday life must be used to catalyze a more sustainable, inclusive, healthier, and happier world, and also build a community and city and built environment that's more livable and happier. So we are so thrilled to bring this important conversation and agenda setting ideas for the future of our built environment with our partner ArchDaily. I'm Prathima Manohar from the Urban Vision, and I co-host this series with my colleague Sam Lubell. Sam?
Thanks, Prathima. We have another, hold on.
Sam? Okay, we've lost your voice again. We seem to have trouble with your voice. Are you back, Sam?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, we're having another echo. I was getting a flashback from last episode. Sorry about that. We just and our guests, we're extremely excited to have two persons in the field of retail and a little bit of dining as well. And we're going to talk about that. And our guests are Chris van Duijn. He's a partner at OMA, and Sean Slater, who is a principal at RDC. OMA, of course, is based in Rotterdam, and RDC has offices in different locations, but Sean is based in San Diego. And Van Duijn's worked on several of OMA's notable retail projects. They include the Prada stores that you probably have all seen in New York and Los Angeles, the Prada Transformer in Seoul, and the new Hanwha Galleria Department Store in Seoul, which Chris is going to share with you. And Sean has practiced all over the country in Berkeley, Atlanta, Austin, LA, now, of course, San Diego. And he's been designing retail and restaurant spaces for more than 20 years and writing a lot of articles about how to rethink retail, how to rethink malls, how to rethink suburbs. So we think they're both perfect guests for this show. So we're going to start off with what we call the blueprint. And the blueprint, if you're new to the show, is the introductory segments where our speakers very quickly share their ideas and their concepts and their past work and their vision for the theme, which in this case is retail. So we're going to start with Chris. Chris, if you want to, I'm going to pull up your slides, hopefully without any technical snafus, and you're going to start off and get the conversation going.
Okay, good. Then I'll take over from here. Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to join the show. Yeah, I'm working a lot in Asia. The recent years before, also in Europe and in the States, as you said. Prada was one of the kind of early retail projects, and recently we're doing quite a few retail projects all around the world. And again, I'm focusing mainly on Asia. So I put together a few slides. I want to start with this slide. This is a bit of a kind of a global introduction to the subject. Can you share the image still? Yes. Okay. Good. I think this is somehow again a good image that kind of summarizes, let's say, the big picture trend that has happened over the past decades gradually in retail. On the left side, it's a photo by Gursky.
Sorry, guys, I can't hear anything.
Can you not hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me?
This is Sean. Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you. I think, Sam, it's your audio again.
Okay.
Unplug the external mic and...
Okay, well, then I'll just continue talking.
Yes,
because
please. Yes.
the audience will be able to listen. But basically, the image on the left is an image taken by Gursky. On the right side, you see an image from a department store in St. Petersburg. And what is interesting is basically that this transition somehow captures the big trends. On the one hand, this kind of space that was basically a space for physical transaction of goods between a consumer and shopkeeper. And on the right side, basically the trend that has happened, basically it's not longer a physical transaction about goods, but it, let's say, retail has become much more an emotional transaction. It's about the brand identity that you experience, the brand identity that you actually buy. So in a way, from physical to emotional. And then kind of a cynical observation is that basically the trend is shifting and from, let's say, a functional space to a space which is about well, hot air, and basically is reduced to an image only. Of course, it's, well, Instagrammable. It's about getting people into the space. And changes, the space can change every week. It's much more about set design than about really a place for physical interaction or change. Of course, that happened, that kind of e-commerce trends the last 2 decades is pushing this very much. COVID has accelerated that process. Of course, it was a process that was going on already for a long time, and this is probably where we are. So basically, this is where I could stop. But this is an interior image. But the same also happens basically on the outside, let's say in the city, on the streets, where the shops get kind of emptier. Inside, also the city centers get emptier, the malls get emptier, and eventually this will also affect the urban life overall. So it's also about kind of distinction in society. On the one hand, the kind of the goods, the cheap stuff, masses of people versus the ultimate luxury, kind of empty space in the most expensive shopping streets. So this is a kind of also reflection of what has happened in our society, kind of trends. And Prathima, you want to kind of hear a happy story and have a kind of positive story. At least that is kind of our our aim. That's what we're going to get to. So this is, let's say, the end of the kind of chapter 1. Now I will try to explain with some other slides how we could also maybe revert this trend. At least that is our ambition and kind of intention also. And I'm using this example. I have some more projects, but like this project I think is interesting. It's interesting because it's a project in Korea that we kind of finished in February of this year, and that the opening date was set on 14th of February, which was just 1 or 2 weeks after the first COVID cases started in Korea. So that meant that basically this project was our first COVID victim, because the opening ceremony and everything else was kind of cancelled. And it even means that I've never seen the project finished and completed because we couldn't enter the country anymore. So that is why I thought it's a interesting project to start. But it's also interesting because I think in all the work that we've done on retail, it's one of the few examples, I think positive examples, that shows that let's say the respect between architecture and retail can actually, it exists. Often there is not a real balance between the kind of the architects don't take retail very serious, and the retail people also don't take architecture very serious. And I think this is an example where actually we kind of managed to get a rather good balance between the two projects, or between the two kind of sites. Also, this is a, let's say, a project with an urban intention. This is building in a new town in Korea, in Seoul, about an hour drive from Gangnam. And we felt very much that this new town did not really have a physical center, something that kind of has a kind of point of gravity that you feel if you're there, you're in the center of the town. Something has to kind of grow, and that's why we also developed this project that has this almost kind of Roman appearance of something that has been there for a very, very, very long time. And that's urban intention. To create a building with urban intention, we've also kind of pulled in. Maybe we can go to the next slides. Because what I showed before at the beginning in the first slides, the kind of the very full shop and very empty shop, I think retail is not about either or. It's really about kind of you need both. And also the client here asked us at the beginning, like I want to have this very, very, very efficient shop. If department owners are basically not retailers, they just rent out square meters, and every square meter they want to rent out to a brand, and the brand all want their standards fit in. So you have this very kind of strict set of rules that we need to comply with, that's their business model. So we had to make a very efficient, functional department store. On the other hand, the owner, let's say, Korean companies are often owned by families. The kind of owner kind of said, well, I want something that is new, different in Korea, and sets a new trend. So challenge us. So challenge our conventions in retail, but also respect them. And I think this project has both. So 95% of the project is basically traditional department store. Square plan, central set of escalators, very flexible, and basically it completely complies to their set of rules. And then on the right, you see the other 5%. And the other 5% basically, well, you could say disrupts the dogmas of shopping, but it does not, let's say it complements what the other 95% already does. And that is what you see in this project. Basically, you can do both, we hope. Can you go to the next slide, please? Because the next slide shows, yeah, this is inside the box, right in the center. So it's a 12-story tall building with retail on 8 floors. And in the center, we have these escalators going up. They didn't want to have any voids. They didn't want to waste any square meters on air. They can't rent out. So it's going to be very, very minimal voids around the escalators. And that's it. So we gave that to them. But what we also added, that's the next slide, is this route, this trajectory that is on the left side. You see the entrance door from the street. That's basically pulling the street up to the building, into the building, up to the roof garden on level 13, and that is a, let's say, informal route that does challenge all the other conventions, but also, let's say, the challenge of shopping, but also challenges the typical floor plate on every floor in a different way. So this is a route, a kind of combination of different moments, partly unprogrammed, like you walk through a city street and you just kind of want to sit on a bench and not shop for a moment. I mean, that is what you can do here. It's breakout space of the shopping, but it also includes different types of program and shopping program as well. So what you can clearly see is that there's daylight and there is view. And those are some of those dogmas that you, well, let's say retailers rather don't have. And maybe that's opening up slowly. So you can kind of walk up here, and maybe we can go to the next slides. And then there's a series of different moments, like here, this 2 stories further, where there's these kind of special moments that are can be used for exhibition, that can be used for cafe, that can be used for pop-up, and for breakouts. And they also always connect into these main retail spaces. So they have these kind of fluent transitions between the typical retail and the special retail. This is a part of the loop, a triple height space that has this special store for Samsung. And if you go then even further up, one slide further, you have this part where it only becomes a kind of a trail, an urban trail, where actually this trajectory pops out of the volume and brings you to the F&B level. So there's a lot of variety, but also we create a strong relation with the city, and vice versa. You can see people, you kind of drawn in, and you can also experience the kind of beautiful landscape surrounding this project. So that's that relation between city and the kind of usually very closed box of retail is something that we challenged by introducing different circulation, bring in daylight, bring in view, and bring in these kind of unprogrammed spaces that are flexible. So I think that is interesting, because we were seeking this relation between the kind of a local condition, in this case the new town, and retail. And in the next slide, that you like, slide 9, that you wanted to show, it's a different example of exactly the same. It's also a department store, but this is in Venice, and this is a building which is 800 years old, a very historical building, and it was pretty difficult to let's say convince the authorities to have a department store here, adding more retail. And if you look at the image, you can see it's a courtyard building. In the center, there's a courtyard, and there's this glass roof on top of that. And with the authorities, it was agreed that this could be developed into retail, but it should be invisible from the courtyard. The courtyard is a very kind of beautiful space, and it had to stay public, have a public character. So we tried to find a balance between having a kind of public realm inside the department store, without branding, merchandising, anything else, and still have the kind of flexible merchandise, like retail area in that ring around it. The next slide shows a little bit how we used the architecture of that building. It's 800 years old, but of course, during the centuries, many things have happened. So what we were able to do, and that's a very Italian thing, of course, is to kind of really work with all the history and basically unravel all these layers in the building. So we could make this kind of superposition of all these, let's say, of all the historical layers in the building, and adding our own building, which is basically mainly about the circulation space. And the last step is the next slide, slide 11. On top of the building, we also added the public terrace that brings people up from the streets all the way to the roof. And it's one of the few moments where you can actually have a nice overview over Venice, because usually you only see Venice from the canals or from those kind of very small alleys. So that is, let's say, on the level of a building. This project I show here was a competition entry that we developed for a project in Shanghai, basically extending the same kind of intention of working with existing fabric. The little wooden houses that are elevated up are shikumen houses, which are about 100 years old, in the center of Shanghai. And as you know, a lot of those historical buildings have been demolished and replaced by kind of big new buildings. The challenge here was to redevelop that, and to also preserve, of course, the heritage, but still redevelop. And of course, the first thing that was proposed by the developer is to put retail into all these existing residential houses, but they're all based on this 4-meter grid. And if you do that, you basically gut out this entire block, only keep the facades, and that's it. So instead of doing that concept, we proposed to excavate one more level below, because we anyway had to kind of excavate for a car park, and then put all the retail in the basement. The good thing about it is there's 3 metro lines on the 3 different sides that were not connected, so we could connect that underground, and then do another kind of urban developments on the, let's say, in the historical buildings, bringing back a residential program, but also mixing it with small-scale hotel program, cultural program, and let's say basically have that urban level continue, and have that commercial retail program, let's say, function and connect to the MTR at its best, unrestricted from the restrictions of these historical buildings that they would otherwise have. And if you then connect that vertically, and maybe you can show the next slide, that is slide 13. You can see how, let's say, that's one of the kind of 7 moments that we introduced in the project, how we could connect the heritage from above ground with the retail below ground. Yeah, that's this image. So very few exceptions we made, but if so, then it has a very kind of strong impact, and of course it kind of brings a lot of character and identity also to the retail space. So working with local context and finding a kind of way how we can integrate the systems of retail. We have to understand them, of course, but also understand the systems of urban, of let's say, the city, the urban condition. Then there's the last slide, slide 14. I mean, it could continue for much longer, but I just try to keep it short. The next slide is another thing about opening up retail, opening up black boxes, bringing daylight, and also relating existing buildings to kind of new developments. We can also pull that further and let's say open up buildings physically by, especially where you can, in subtropical environments, air-conditioned spaces, semi-conditioned spaces, and challenge the conventions of kind of the shopping mall, especially what we do in the south of China, bringing these kind of urban tracks inside and unconditioned spaces that kind of I think bring in another quality. So that is something we're interested in kind of, let's say, combining the best of all worlds by understanding kind of the mechanism of shopping that you have to understand, of course, but moreover, yeah, kind of be very respectful with the urban condition, the environment, and the local culture.
It's amazing. Chris, this is fascinating, and we will talk more about this after Sean gives his presentation, but the one thing I should say is, I mean, these are incredibly seductive spaces, which I think is something that, you know, COVID has accelerated the kind of move away from retail. And I think this idea of having spaces that people are so excited to go to is what sort of, you know, is now being even, you know, pushed even in a more extreme direction. So after Sean, after you're going, because I know some of what you're doing has along similar lines, you know, it'd be great to talk about. These are, you know, not what people think of when they think of a lot of retail. So it's really fascinating.
Great. So, Prathima, if you want to go to the first slide. So Sam, after we spoke yesterday, I realized I was leaving out a part of the story here. So indulge me for a moment. So I grew up literally on Main Street. My address as a child was 707 West Main, and the store that my father moved us to his hometown when I was about 5 years old. I think I'm about 6 years old in this photo on the bottom left, and we had Slater menswear. So what you're seeing on the screen right now really was America. That this is sort of the real version, and until about, let's say 1985, that was how most people shopped. There were malls, obviously, we're going to get to that in just a minute, but there was a menswear store, there was a women's wear store, 2 department stores, what we call dime stores, which were sort of variety stores, hardware stores. So everything you see in sort of on the main street was very quickly replaced by, maybe go to the next slide and we can look a little bit at, this is a slightly prior in history, but I think this is what we sort of did to our landscape and our environment. So as you said, I've been practicing architecture for the last 25 years. I grew up in a retail store from 5 years old, and I sort of never saw myself getting to this point, but COVID has really changed everything. We've been talking, and we've been sort of in the development world in the United States, at least. We've been sort of humming along with the idea that we could continue to produce new retail and that it would be filled up and that older retail would either be demolished or converted into other uses. I think that that's been accelerated pretty tremendously. And the sort of the agenda for retail in the United States, I think has changed and needs to change. If you go to the next slide after that, I believe we have some statistics. So how did we get here? The images you saw on the last slide were intentionally shown. They were all sort of in fields, and in some cases they were surrounded by, you know, sort of Levittown type housing around them. How we got to where we are, most of the sort of shopping malls that were done in the 50s and 60s were sort of urban, really returning people to the urban, you know, neighborhoods. White flight, of course, is something that we're dealing with today. The top left image, I think, is really informative. And I always tell my team, just squint and you can sort of get the idea. These are from justice.org, if anybody wants to look at your city in the United States. In almost every city, redlining, which was a housing practice basically to prevent certain races from living adjacent to each other, to put it nicely, created these sort of swaths in our cities of racial disparity and also sort of racial segregation. What that has led to now is that these first wave of mall building, which was the main street sort of translating itself into sort of mass market form. That first wave was often built in, you know, as I said, greenfields or right at the edge of urban growth at the time of white flight, so 50s and 60s. As that sort of continued to progress, urban malls started to decay. Suburban malls moved farther and farther out. There's a quote later in here from one of my favorite authors, Bill Bryson, about Des Moines being sort of the classic American city. It's just a series of malls on 3 concentric circles. That, as we sit here in 2020, I believe the urban mall model, I'm sitting across the street from Horton Plaza, which was a John Jardy designed shopping center in the mid 80s. It was very successful for what it was when it was here. And we are currently converting that into biotech office. And I think that those sorts of urban malls have great potential. The property values are extremely strong. And I think that they have an ability to really be a mix of uses between retail, office, it could be educational facilities. The super suburban malls, the ones that sort of have everything going for them, including access, including proximity to very wealthy neighborhoods, they're going to be fine. I think what we're going to see in the next 5 years, as opposed to the prior 10 years, is adding density to those sites. It's already started to happen. I believe housing, we're doing a lot of projects, which is adding sort of mixed use, but mostly housing to these mall sites to really start to densify and create community of sorts out in the outer reach suburbs. The slide that I was showing, justice.org, and also the photograph of Detroit is really where we're focusing right now. We believe that the great opportunity in American cities, given the last sort of 50 years of retail development, is in that inner ring suburb. And I've written about that for the ULI and Urban Land, that it's just an incredibly ripe field, essentially, of 100-acre sites surrounding our cities that are sitting in the most diverse, most interesting, and potentially the most sort of culturally significant parts of our cities. So much of what we're talking about right now, much of what we're working on right now, we have clients that are sort of keenly interested in how do you redevelop those, not sort of lose the value that has been on that site as a single use, and how do you start to work with communities and sort of integrate back into. And if you go to the next slide, there's kind of a shocking statistic, or potentially shocking statistic for those of you who don't know. The United States has 8.5 billion square feet of retail space. I checked again this morning to make sure I wasn't mistaken here, but that's equates to about 23 square feet per person for every man, woman, and child in the United States. That's double the amount of office space in the entire United States. So that says something about the way that our sort of laws and our tax codes have been written to promote this sort of mass growth of retail at all cost. We build freeways to get to the retail. We build housing around the retail. That sort of mentality, I think, is being really questioned at this point. I guess going back to my idea, the urban mall is kind of an easy gimme, because it can be easily converted into uses that are proximate to any of the downtown uses. So like I said, education, office, hospitality. The inner ring suburban malls, however, we really have started concentrating on a different way of looking at that and really leading with community engagement, leading not with large, sort of the entire city, but who lives right around, who lives, and if you go to the next slide, we'll have some examples of some of the studies that we've done to really use everything at our disposal to evaluate the folks who actually live in the areas now, who have more or less grown up around the shopping center. The shopping center has done very little for their community other than jobs, which is very important. And now we see as a land bank. So I believe that, what we are really focusing on is community engagement. And then what you see sort of on the bottom of this slide, this is an exercise that we've been doing sort of hypothetically. We've taken sort of zip codes and different sort of statistical areas and created this sort of amalgamation of a Facebook page. So what you see on the bottom left are sort of 5 fictitious people that we really combined, kind of 100 different profiles that we found. And then we used that as our lens. And we believe this is really our charge going forward. We're going to use that as our lens for every design decision. So when we start asking ourselves, what kind of space would Hans need, or what kind of space would Maria need? In many cases, the folks living around the existing sort of inner city mall sites, they need services. They need service to their single parents. They need to be able to, both entertain their children on the weekends, but they also need to care for them and educate them during the week. So how do we respond in a way that's very different than the way retail development has generally been sort of pro forma? How do we start to respond and say that there is actually a great profit motive if we start with community? We can actually, the return on investment can be equal if we rethink how we look at these sites as we start to fill in our cities. And if that means it's a return back to more of a main street, which was kind of the perfect amount of retail for the little town I grew up in, for instance, I think that maybe starts to recalibrate the way that we sort of convert that 8.5 billion square feet of retail space in the United States into something else, and start to really concentrate our retail zones, concentrate our shopping zones. Between 2/3 and 3/4 of the US economy is shopping, essentially. That's going to change. It's changing right now. The last 6 months have been pretty earth-shaking for the physical retail environment. I think what Chris showed is, really where architecture and retail intersect, which I think we're going to get there. We've never really sort of embraced that as a concept except in our inner cities, and I think that we will get there. But first, we have to tackle that overabundance of retail space. What are we going to do with it? How do we make it a richer environment, and how do we start to improve our cities and take advantage of some of this that's been built? And then the last slide here, like I tell my team again, you squint and you can sort of get the idea. I don't want to talk about any of these in particular, but the idea is that, especially with COVID, that adaptive reuse, open air, and mixing of different types of people is really essential, I believe, to the future of our cities, to the growth of the suburbs, to really the meaning of our country in a lot of ways, is how do we get people back together in these spaces, and what kind of spaces, what kind of retail environments are conducive to bringing different types of people together, and really creating that sort of creative friction that has always been so helpful to our economy and grown our cities and our companies that have been sort of spurred by that growth historically. So again, this is these projects that we're working on are all inside out. We're lucky enough to be, as Prathima said, I'm in beautiful San Diego, California. But essentially throughout much of the country, I believe we can implement indoor, outdoor, really blurring the lines, sort of like Chris's last slide, really blurring the lines between what is retail and what is recreation, what is dining, what is living, and what are the public spaces that sort of fill in between all of those spaces. And I think that we'll talk about that a little bit more, but to me, the future of retail is sort of adaptive reuse and finding the locations where people actually need food, beverage, goods, and being in a much more micro way, being really strategic about whatever new retail we insert into communities.
Yeah, those were great. I love this, the links between our community life, cities, and retail that you both brought up through your existing work and reflections on how the future of retail could be. Thank you so much, Sean and Chris, for those introductory comments. And I want to start this discussion by pointing out to the moment that we are in. Entire countries have been locked down, and consumers around the world have had to shun human interaction and community life that came out very beautifully in your work. Retailers are obviously scrambling to adapt. Economies are scrambling to adapt to this new reality. And if the economy and retailers are especially, if they have to revive, we can't just be experiential playgrounds. I mean, those are beautiful spaces that you showed us. We have to respond to the kind of hyper health protocols that we are witnessing around the world as this pandemic rips through all of our cities and societies. So tell us, what do you think are the short-term impact of COVID on retail? I know, you both probably were working on existing retail projects in different parts of the world. Have they been impacted? And what are the short-term uh, changes in design you're kind of integrating due to this crisis, which probably will be with us for at least the next couple of years? Chris?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of questions in one go. But I think the nice thing is we have very different conditions. Sean, in the US, I mean, certain things, let's say, that are in the US relevant now may only be relevant to Europe or Asia much later, and others will never happen, or vice versa. Um, a few things. I think, first of all, like the whole COVID thing, there is something good about it. I think that we are, when you talk about a better world, and I think that's kind of, we are optimists here, is to maybe rethink our own consumer pattern. And I think, first of all, we have too much of everything, and we have too much consumption. And I think the result will be that there will be probably a lot of the retail will disappear, which inevitable will be the case because of all the e-commerce. So there will be a kind of shift from kind of quantity to quality, and therefore we'll have to redevelop, reprogram, and that I think is very much an urban subject that we will be working on. So I think that will happen, maybe more here in Europe and in the US. I mean, Sean, you have explained quite well the situation over there. At the same time, strangely enough, and is that we are working on quite a few different retail projects in Asia, from 300,000 square meter malls to mixed-use projects with podiums of 40,000 square meters of mall and such type of project. I see no response at this moment, because in Asia there is still the kind of growth, economic growth and expansion, and still that optimism that I'm also, let's say, quite surprised by the little I have heard from our clients about changing their business model or anything. On the other hand, I think what makes it different, at least the project in the context that we are working on, from the one that Sean is sketching, is that the retail projects are already much better integrated and embedded in an urban context. They're never kind of built completely out, isolated, monofunctional. They are usually part of a mixed-use development, usually part of a system of public transports, and usually part of a system of indoor and outdoor spaces that are being developed and designed either in the new parts, but also in the kind of, as I showed you, kind of inner cities of Shanghai, and so on. So, I mean, I think the big picture will be kind of less retail. I mean, the focus on quantity will drop, and therefore more variety, more quality, because all the developments have to somehow be, let's say, unique enough and have their own qualities in order to survive. I think that would be in a nutshell my let's say observation of the current trend.
Sean, comments on this? I know you mentioned in your introductory remarks of the oversupply situation in America.
Yeah, so I think luckily I'm not working on any project and haven't really been for the past 3 or 4 years that are retail alone. So we use the word mixed use sort of incorrectly sometimes. We like to call it multi-use. So if for any given site, in the United States, housing sort of can live on its own, and a retail main street can live on its own, and perhaps other uses. I think that that's only going to sort of be amplified by COVID. I know it is. But from our firm's practice, we also do a lot of markets. We do everything from really high-end, very organic markets all the way down to sort of mass market grocery stores. That's a sector that's been sort of booming beyond anybody's imagination during COVID, as we've been at home, sort of locked down in some areas of the country, really for the last 7 or 8 months. Sort of the return to nesting and the return home drives a certain kind of retail. And I think that for the first time in our lives, boxes arriving at our door is the way that we experience retail now. I think that the ability to go to a shopping center is so limited at this point that we're at a really critical time where people's minds and their behaviors are really changing. So I do think that I'm just going to keep saying 8.5 billion square feet, that's sort of unfathomable. But if you start to think about that being converted into housing, which we still, luckily, for the sake of this real estate, we have a housing crisis in the United States in that we're underbuilt for a country that's still growing. We have underbuilt housing for really since the Great Recession in 2007, 8, 9. So the addition of housing to retail sites, I think, only makes that environment richer and more productive, quite honestly, for the retailer. But it would be foolish to ignore the fact that e-commerce has gone from 1, 2, 3% of retail sales to maybe 20, 30%. And I think that the trajectory of that is frightening for physical retail at the moment. But I think that coming out of this, and we will come out of this, and I agree with Chris, and we're very bullish and optimistic about America and our cities. I think coming out of this, the ability to rethink how and why people get together. And it's not to carry shopping bags. That has been a byproduct historically of going shopping. It's to see other people. It's to mix. And it's honestly to learn trends, fashion, attitudes from other people. And that's always been what sort of I feel like the American shopping mall was about. But the single-use aspect of our retail regions in the United States don't allow that. So I believe that's our great sort of conceptual shift that will be happening hopefully over the next 10 years, is as many people as you can put on a retail site, the better the retail will be. And it will be much smaller than it was before. Right.
That's really interesting. You both seem to be comfortable with this idea that there will be less retail, but that's not necessarily, doesn't mean the death of retail, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily even necessarily bad thing. But I have a question. I wanted to ask you each a question specific to your work about that. So Chris, maybe I'll start with you. Because as I mentioned, there's always, you sort of see this hand wringing about, retail's dead, digital's killing it, COVID's killing it even more. But there's this kind of concept among people who really understand it, that it's not dying, it is changing, and maybe not necessarily, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And for Chris, your firm, OMA, is specialized, in the last 20, 30 years in disrupting retail already. I think of the Prada stores in New York and LA, just this idea that retail can sort of be merged with things like culture, and kind of be raised to the level of fine art even, and bringing people to retail for different contexts and different reasons. And the projects you're talking about looking in Korea with these sort of pathways through, it's not just about a new type of kind of mixed use, but it's even a new type of kind of experience. Like you're on this kind of mysterious pathway. Kind of reminded me of when I've been to the library in Seattle that your firm did that I love so much. Just this kind of sense of exploration and kind of discovery. So it's just these kind of you're kind of continue to disrupt what retail is. So my question is, I mean, where's that going next? How are you going to pull people that are kind of now like, well, I could just click my mouse here and buy that, you know? What's the next phase in pulling people in? I've seen, you know, a lot of, you know, you showed us some of the ideas. I love the greenery, I love the pathways, but what are the next phases of kind of seduction that you're planning to get people to come into retail spaces?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think the interesting thing is that if you look back, somehow retail has been gradually invading or let's say taken over a lot of the kind of other public activities in our lives. I mean, it's no longer the shop in the shopping street, but now shopping is, you know, in museum, in airports, train stations, everywhere else. And it has gradually eaten up kind of as its parasites. No, it has been everywhere. It seems to be the kind of the turnaround point that now the retail actually is creating new public space and other activities because it needs it also. So I think that is kind of a different way of how we could look at this. That it's also an opportunity to create better cities. I think in a way, retail, it's of course commercial, and you can look at it from a bad side, but it's also kind of urban glue. You know, it kind of ties together a lot of our activities in the city, from living, working, using public transport, leisure, culture, social activities. So somehow we can, let's say, work with retail as a kind of urban glue to kind of connect all these other kind of nodes and development. So it will be probably very diverse, very yeah, kind of a lot of variety, mixing program, because indeed the kind of shopping with the shopping bags, it is a kind of old retail. It's you buy something, you buy food, you buy image, you buy identity, and you move around. I mean, it's all going to be much more fluent. And I think in the end, also in terms of spatially and in terms of urban design, that will also become more and more fluent.
That's really interesting. It makes me think. I worked on a book with Moshe Safdie recently about a project he did in Singapore called Jewel, which was in the airport in Singapore, and they had this huge, you know, battle with the developer. They literally gave over half the retail space to make a giant park, you know, and so the park is really the star of the show, and the retail is, you know, kind of co-mingling with that and supporting it. But it turns out that the retail there is now like much more successful than any retail, like basically in the city. So it's like give and take. I feel like that retail, if they're willing to do that, you know, it can pay off.
Right. Right. Well, everybody knows the park and then finds out there is retail behind it.
Right.
So you see, it's a strong magnet.
Right. No, I think it's fascinating. I'm really interested to see. I love to see what you did in Seoul there, to really create a space. You don't think of that as a retail space. You think of it, and it's almost like you don't think of it as any type of. It's like a new type of space. It's like you're inventing a new typology almost.
I'm also looking forward to see it because I haven't been able to enter Korea since February.
Right. We're all hoping to travel. And Sean, I wanted to quickly ask you, because one thing that struck me about your presentation and about the work is the amount of research that you guys are doing. You're talking about, okay, people want a space that talks to where they live and talks to who they are and talks to the history and the kind of community. And that seems to be something that's often missing, is just almost doing that legwork, you know, kind of studying a place and really getting to know what the factors are. And do you think, is that something that you guys have been kind of picking up in recent years, or has that always been a big part? And how is that sort of going to contribute in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that we've had to work a lot harder as architects and designers than we did perhaps in the past to make meaningful places and meaningful architecture. So you do have to start looking for any cue you can find. I think in the past it was fairly superficial, and it was maybe just a quick demographic snapshot of where you live. Again, this is sort of new retail growing and growing and growing. As we start to look at communities and start to work with communities and start to provide the kind of retail that they actually need and that helps grow them and raise their standard of living, I think you can't do that without a deeper dive and without deeper research. We sort of, my team and I just can't get enough information, honestly. And we're doing both real sort of tactical exercises with sites that we have and projects we're working on. Some of the images that I showed earlier are from a hypothetical exercise that we did sort of at the very beginning of the pandemic to say, how can we approach a landowner or whether it be retail or mixed use or industrial, and say to them, we know because we've built the problem, we know how to fix the problem. And I think that, on the surface of it, that's a strange argument, but I think it is very helpful to understand how we got here. And going all the way back to sort of growing up on a main street and watching what Walmart and watching what big boxes did to that town. I didn't include it, but the town is completely dead now. There's no retail at all, except for, sort of nail salons. So I think that what they were unable to do, what small towns and sort of smaller markets are unable to do, is really attract retailers without a certain level of sort of, very high-end demographics. It's always been historical, which is why in America, and Chris probably doesn't even know, the dollar store is the #1 retailer. It's expanded, and its relatives have expanded, sort of wildly in the past 10 years in small towns. That is the grocery store. That is the only place that in most smaller towns in the United States people can shop, is the dollar store. And that just wasn't the case before. So I think there's a reckoning, and I think we really have to rethink how we look at new projects and how we look at existing projects, and how we really evaluate the needs first of the people that are directly surrounding the sites. And that's, again, very different than the sort of the typical ROI driven developer mindset, which has been great at expanding. I think now it's really about contracting and concentrating that. And I think that if you're not sort of a perfect reflection of your neighborhood, then you're failing and you're not really hitting the mark, and you will have a problem surviving if you're not really intrinsically linked to the people that live directly adjacent.
So we're basically going back to the old school model where, your shopping was part of your life and it felt like part of your community, versus this sort of kind of international kind of whatever formula that was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spent 50 years getting in our cars and driving, in some cases a long time, to get to an internalized shopping experience that was tailored to storefronts and consumption. Food is shopping. Fitness is shopping, healthcare is shopping, and as Chris mentioned, sort of travel and airports, train stations have always been a retail experience. Whether you're buying a hot dog or you're buying a Prada bag, it's a very similar sort of endorphin rush that you're getting. So I think that we can satisfy people's, sort of, especially Americans, sort of need to the handbag piece by giving them a richer environment and sort of letting them realize that every activity they're doing, there's choice, and there's sort of a really openness to our projects that allow for a lot of choice. And that is the satisfaction, I think, that we thought when we crammed a bunch of people into an enclosed space, we thought we were giving them that experience. In fact, we were just homogenizing that experience. And if we start to loosen that up and allow our entire sort of population to experience the very similar things that we've sort of segmented historically, I think we just create a much richer city, a much richer country.
Yeah. Sean, your points are so, linked to the crisis of cities in general. I think in the 21st century, city, especially in America and maybe in the new emerging cities, not so much in Europe, Chris, we've built a culture where you've kind of, retail shifted from main streets and downtowns to strip malls and enclosed malls and big box stores. And that meant that our life was about going from the parking lot of our homes to the parking lot of the mall to pick up that bottle of milk, So our life was based on the car-centric city, and there was a great mayor from a South American city who once said that malls are a sign of a failed city. And we can see that especially in emerging world cities, especially here in India. And I want to talk a little bit more about the link between urbanism and retail. What do these radical kind of changes in retail mean to the city? And I want to kind of qualify that question with the fact that retail, and I mean storefronts and stores, is so crucial to good urbanism, right? The community life on the street that you described, mixed use, human scale architecture, pedestrian orientation is probably like, makes a great city. And we've, like you mentioned, lost parts of that main street and the big kind of community life in our cities to these big box retail, and obviously now we're losing it to e-commerce, I guess. So what are your thoughts on that? How do we ensure that the next generation of retail development doesn't make our cities into ghost towns, and allows us to retain the community life and good urbanity? And Chris, you in your work are trying to integrate the built environment with communal life. I could see that in your introductory slides and your blueprint for the future. Is that a big kind of focus area as you think about future of retail?
Yes, indeed. I mean, of course, every city, every project is different. The context is different, but it is one of the focuses to kind of break down this box and create this kind of more diverse environment, integrate urban places, inside, outside, and mix program. Because I mean, this kind of this shopping only, and Sean also just said it. I mean, buying a hot dog is retail. Retail is not only shopping bags and going from the grocery store, but having going out for dinner, go to culture, go to the gym. That is all parts of this retail experience. And it simply means you need a very kind of diverse setting, a very diverse environment, where you're in contact with others, with the city, with the streets, with the landscape around you. So yeah, that is in somehow the red kind of line connecting our projects a lot. Yeah.
Sean?
And Sean, before you start, I wanted to, it seems like, and to build on what Chris was saying, which I think is really important, this sort of, merging with the city. You had shown us the like Horton Plaza, like this idea that you can sort of, there's this opportunity now, there's all this space that's sort of outdated that you can now retrofit, and there's maybe too much of it for retail, you can put in other things. It's almost like a chance to rethink the whole, there's a major portion of our city. So to me, that's very exciting, that idea.
Yeah, I mean, it is to us as well. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm not currently working on any project that doesn't have another use involved with it. And that's very lucky. None of those projects have gone on hold because the other uses still have a market here. They still have need and they still have a use. To the question about urbanism and cities, I mean, I think that we have a long way to go. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about what we've done to our urban fabric, but really the last 20 years, a lot has changed. A lot of our cities have become much more sort of urban and focused on the downtowns. I should mention what we're seeing right now also with COVID is a return sort of back to the suburb. As people have been locked in their sort of urban homes and have had very limited experiences with retail, and the street life has suffered, there's a pretty big movement to move back out into the suburbs. I think that presents an enormous opportunity. It's a big challenge, obviously, but when you take folks that have lived in New York City, San Francisco, in Los Angeles, and put them into a more suburban environment, then I think that it's our job to respond to their direct needs and the love that they had of that urban experience. And again, I'll just say this 100 times. It's all about the sort of creative friction of putting different types of people in a similar space and seeing what happens. I mean, what typically happens is people smile. What typically happens is you want to get a coffee or you want to get something to eat and you want to sit down and spend some time. That can be anywhere. That can be in the suburbs, that can be in exurbs, and that has always been sort of what our cities all across the world, but especially in Europe, were those types of experiences that we all as Americans sort of hold up on a pedestal. I believe that urban retail has a long way to go, but I believe it has a great life. I'm a big believer that disruption like we're seeing right now leads to great creativity. And I believe that we are going to see a wave of innovation, both technological and otherwise, to create products, but also to create experiences that people can experience in the city they never could before. And then the other piece of this, I just think that our cities are littered with parking lots, and even our inner cities are littered with parking lots. So the great opportunity, if I was a developer, would be to look at those parking lots and say, what can I do in our cities to create a more seamless urban fabric? And that's still an enormous challenge when we get back on the street. And I'm happy to say that most of our cities are starting to function again, with stores mostly open. But I do think that, the spaces in between, which is largely parking lots or alleys, I think those are some great opportunities to sort of reinforce the progress that we've made in densifying and sort of making the richness of our sort of downtown cities.
Right. And Sean, I'm going to ask you one more question, because you did alluded to technology and the role that technology can play. So I wanted to kind of dig into technology a little bit more, because obviously shopping, technology is now, embedded into everything with technology, and there's so much that's now done virtually and online, even more so now with COVID. But I'm going to try to share my screen, which is bold because I often have technical issues when I try this, but we're going to do it anyway. Hold on one second. Is that a full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Miracle. Okay. So there's this concept that I've been looking at, which is, in a lot of cases, it's almost like the stores become like a stage and the online becomes like the back of house. Like you sort of have this symbolic store, like this pop-up Adidas here, and sort of replacing, other types of stores like Walmarts and that type of thing. But the bulk of the work it becomes stuff that you're doing online, and you're just using that almost as like a prop to increase the brand, which is, of course, nothing new. Architecture has been symbolic for a long time. It's architecture is certainly a huge symbol now, and architecture can function quite effectively that way. But is that a model that is sustainable when you have this sort of kind of architecture as the symbol, and sort of you can check out stuff, but most of your buying is being done online?
I think that's where we are. I think that there's no going back. I can't imagine putting the genie back in the bottle on this. I mean, I'm often in a store checking, we're all doing this, checking the price. So should I buy it here, or should I just have it delivered to my house? If it's, a significant amount cheaper, I'll buy it in the store. But if it's not, why wouldn't I want it arriving at my house? Now, sort of that depends on us all wanting to buy stuff. And I think that that's also sort of a specious argument that we should question. But I think what technology really allows us to do is to sort of fine tune our purchases, and it reserves our time, which is the greatest commodity, for experience. And that's pre-COVID, that's sort of everything anyone talked about was experiential retail. The slides that you showed both ends of that. Sort of the Walmart model where, buy online, pick up in the store, return in the store. Just one little anecdote, the Macy's across the street from me at Horton Plaza did more business in returns than it did in sales. So this is something that, that's sort of mind-boggling to me. People were bringing back more stuff than they were actually sending out the door. And I think that very likely is the future also, that our physical, sort of national physical sort of reaction to digital is that it's a transactional experience at the street level, which I think is problematic and something that, we as architects and urban designers need to really think about, that interface between storefront and street in a new way. If people are in fact only sort of returning the thing that they got online that didn't fit, or that they want a quick sort of turnaround, how do we engage people to stay? How do we engage people to actually experience something, and sort of get away from this pure commodity exchange that has been the rule for shopping really since the mall.
Right. And Chris, I wanted to ask you a separate question, and I'm going to again try to share my screen, which is always trouble here, but we'll try it again. So what I wanted to ask you about, because this is something I really respect about your firm, because you guys are known as disruptors. You're really always thinking ahead of the curve. One thing that I've noticed from the pandemic, one of the quote unquote silver linings, which is a loaded term, but anyway, because it's not a very horrible pandemic, but one of the creative things that's come up is this sort of ad hoc response to the virus that you see in architecture. And obviously you see it in retail. You see these screens popping up where the registers are going. You see these marks where people stand. You see directive arrows. And the same in restaurants. I mean, you see this incredible outpouring of creativity, these kind of pop-up restaurants, that almost done, by hand, or in a lot of cases done specifically by hand, all over the world popping up. So there's incredible creativity. So I wanted to ask, I mean, that seems like a silver lining. Is that something, Chris, that you guys are sort of being inspired by, or do you see it sort of acting as a catalyst moving forward? Because you guys always had that sort of, I see as that sort of ad hoc sort of like, we're going to do it. We're going to try this attitude anyway.
I mean, this is all nice, but of course, it's not going to stay. All these kind of ad hoc solutions.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a blip. It's not necessarily something that's gonna kind of filter into architecture going forward.
No, well, I don't really expect so much change in society as some people may hope or think about, that people get wiser after this pandemic. I mean, you can see very quickly how people fall back into their old habits. So I think the people will fall back into their old habits, but kind of the economic structures have changed, and a few trends have already accelerated. So I mean, here in Europe, the pandemic was high until May, June. Things kind of came down, and then just a matter of weeks later, everybody goes on holiday, traveling again, and now we're back into this kind of second wave. So it also shows how short-sighted, let's say, we are, and unable to kind of foresee these kind of consequences that we're facing now. So yeah, in that sense, I think that this is something that will be, let's say, our behavior will not really change from this whole pandemic so much.
Right. Well, Sean, do you agree? That's, as a commenter said, that's a sober assessment of it.
I think we have a lot of public policy that has to respond. The images you showed, I love. Our firm has been doing parklets, so essentially taking a couple of parallel parking spaces. And what it proved well before COVID was that sales in restaurants, sort of gross sales, in some cases doubled just by having 6 tables kind of out in a parking space. Now every restaurant in every city sort of that wants to survive is having to do this really ad hoc sort of movement out into the middle of the street. I think that I'm a little more optimistic. I believe that the longer this goes on, and we've not been Europe, obviously, we're still struggling at a very similar level that we were in March, April, May. I think that people are getting used to this. I think that the folks that I see, this is the joy of their lives is honestly sitting in a street, having a sandwich. Now it used to be something very different. And I really believe that we will find some way to change our public policy to allow for these spaces now that people have sort of seen the beauty of being out in a street or near a street. And then that also begs the question of traffic control. When we get back in the United States, get back to full sort of employment in our downtowns, traffic and people eating in the street doesn't really go together very well. So how sort of city leaders and sort of our state leaders start to try and find that happy medium. We're way off. Before COVID, we were really far from this idea in most cities of mixing people and traffic and sidewalks and food and fitness in many cases that's moved into streets as well. I think it will be a great pullback. I don't want to be too sort of optimistic, but I do think we've moved so far that the pullback, even for us in the United States at least, is a pretty great advance.
Right.
I think one of my favorite things that has happened is all of those tactical urbanism projects that Sam showed, and just bringing community life back into the streets and allowing local economies to flourish. And I know, Chris, in Europe you already had that, but it is nice to see parts of America looking like Europe. So
I'm
nice to see.
very positive about these experiments. I just see that the moment, let's say, people can go back to their old lives, they will just do that as soon as they can. So I'm, let's say, less optimistic in the kind of that all these kind of good intentions will actually stay.
Right.
I can hope so.
Hopefully we'll see some public policy responses to this. At least, I've been saying this a lot over the last week, but it looks like this is almost like a preview to the climate emergency. We've spent trillions and trillions of dollars dealing with this pandemic, which was something that governments knew about. So hopefully we'll be a little bit more wise after this. But I agree. I know what Chris is saying with, historically we've not really, listened to what happened. Learned our lessons.
Maybe
somewhere about retail and sustainability. Of course, I think the whole fashion industry needs to kind of dramatically change, and that whole ecosystem needs to kind of change. And it starts with kind of buying less and buying more conscious things. So if I see these images that you just showed, Sam, the kind of big Adidas box and so on, also the kind of first slide that I showed, I mean, it's kind of cynical that that is the future. Perhaps it's part of the future of retail, but that we're drawn to this hot air. Let's say we just buy only identity and that's it. We buy an image. It's not about real goods, and that's when is necessary to make a real change that relates both to sustainability, COVID, the future of the cities, etc., etc. And well, that is a very, very long run.
Yeah.
But, I think, I agree with you that it probably is amplifying existing trends.
Right.
Retail was, kind of reducing in size across the world because we're all probably shopping more online. So I think there was a retail index study that was out a couple of weeks ago, where they said that the shift away from physical stores to digital shopping has roughly amplified by almost 5 years. And this year, department stores have declined by 60%, and e-commerce has grown, spectacularly in that same period. So obviously, the trends that we all knew has amplified. So you will probably be left with large parts of our cities with malls without, any activity or like large retail boxes.
As Sean is
it's all dead spaces. So what do we do with these infrastructure that we already have built? What are the kind of ways to repurpose them? What kind of policies should cities be kind of embracing at this point in time? Because this is going to happen. And COVID has accelerated an already existing trend, and cities around the world are probably going to be dealing with like lots of empty buildings, which were originally malls. So how do we repurpose them? What could we do about those spaces? Sean? I know you've been thinking a lot about that.
Yeah, so I think it's important to sort of point out that a mall or any sort of single-use retail depends on a steady income stream. It's rent. So the stores collect money from us, they pay it to a landlord, and that's an addictive cycle. So the sort of steady, and even if that's declining, so as all malls have sort of seen, especially during COVID, but really the last 20 years, department stores, now sort of chain stores, the bankruptcies are sort of astronomical at the moment, but the addiction to sort of the nonstop return on investment. I think that if cities can soften through public policy, if philanthropic and cultural institutions can soften that transition from pure retail with no other use to another income stream and retail. My firm is doing, we've been looking at department stores for really the last decade and how you sort of repurpose those. And in most cases, that's a stopgap measure. It's really trying to create yet more shopping where the shopping that was there is not working anymore. So I think that we are going to start seeing more and more of those department stores being looked at as housing and being looked at as much like Horton, much like. And that transition is going to be bumpy. There's a change in the economic model that has to happen that I think is scary, to say at least, and also for folks that are sort of near the end of their career in the development world. Why do I want to do this? So I have great hope for, I'm a Gen Xer, I have great hope for sort of Gen X, and then what I see the younger generations and the sort of the focus on maybe a new civil rights era here in the United States. What I'm really witnessing right now is a real desire to change the way that we look at our cities and the way that the economics work, to be a much more equitable, much more fair, and much more even. Something happened in sort of California yesterday that I think is a indication of that. We're on this kind of color-coded system about how much you can open up, and the state of California just introduced an equity piece of that. So if your city is very unequal in how the COVID rate is going, you do not get to move into the next category. If cities are trying to level that out, where minority populations and people of color and their rate of COVID is more similar and hopefully much lower, then they can move into the next level. So, I feel like there's a great 20 to 30 years probably of change in economic model, in sort of sociological behavior within our cities that needs to happen. And, hopefully I'll live long enough to get to see the other side of this. But the generational change and the economic change to me is the only way, if our cities and our governments really look at it very critically and say, this does not work. What we've been doing will never work again. And we have to incentivize and help the change. And the Urban Land Institute, which I've mentioned a couple of times, is the mission of the Urban Land Institute, really, is to facilitate that kind of change from a world that was a car and retail driven world into something that's much more rich.
And Chris, is your experience been that you talk about groups like the ULI in the US, but I think we're probably a little bit behind you. Have you been experiencing that there's some sort of kind of consensus on what to do with some of these empty spaces, as far as the government or as far as private sector, or even just among architects?
Well, that's more than the European situation than the Asian situation, I think. Well, I think, take for instance Rotterdam here. We have still the kind of traditional model of having shopping streets in the shopping center, and people actually kind of go there by car, but also a lot by bike and public transport. So we don't have that same, let's say, shopping mall issue as in the US so much. But I mean, inevitably, there will be less shops, less retail. And we have, for instance, in kind of radius of 300 meters, 400 meters, 3 H&Ms and 3 Zaras, and we have everything basically double and triple. And we would not need it. At the same time, people have still a lot of time, free time. They still have, let's say, a budget to spend, and we have space in the city. So we will have to find ways how to better, let's say, fill it in, curate it. People still want to spend the time in the city center because that's where the social interaction happens. And one of the things you will see is that probably more people will start to live in the city center. So less office, less retail, and therefore maybe more residential developments. So I hope that therefore it will become kind of a more sustainable mix, less monofunctional, so that in the evenings when the offices are empty and the shops are empty, they're still live on the streets, and there's still kind of more a kind of mixed city life. So I think that would be a kind of trend that would be realistic and feasible, because still the infrastructure in the middle of the cities are good. And with more mixed environments, it's also again more interesting to kind of live there. Maybe there's a little bit more open space, also not bad. So maybe this could be the kind of positive trends for the kind of European condition.
Right, and I should say there are some positive signs in the U.S. Like about the last question we were talking about. That New York has made permanent its changes to restaurant dining, outdoor dining. So now you can, moving forward into other years, you can actually put these things out on the street or in parking spaces. So their governments seem to be slowly catching on. But let's move on to the next segment, which we call Quickfire. As it suggests, we ask very quick questions and we get very quick answers from you. Prathima, do you want to ask the first one?
Yeah, so I want to ask you, which is the best store you've been in architecture-wise? Chris?
Oh, apart from our own designs.
Which one in specific? And
well, stores I don't find so interesting, because that's usually just about experience and interior design, which anyway, kind of in 2 years, it's old and outdated. I think there's many good ones. The one I like, a random one, is GUM in Moscow, which is
that store.
A mall. It's beautiful, classic, but also adaptable. I think there's a lot of things in there that also today would still kind of make sense. So I think that is. But in another one, I think in Bangkok, it's kind of a great city to visit if you are interested in retail trends and malls in an urban context. Like Commons is, I think, a very kind of contemporary mall, which I think is a model that can be will be developed much more. Yeah.
Sean, what about you?
Well, I'm sure I'm supposed to say the Apple Store or any sort of Apple store. But it's funny you said Gumps. Liberty of London is my favorite shopping place ever. I mean, I think that both the fabrics that they produce also translate themselves into the sort of the fine-grained nature of that store. I feel like it's a discovery. It well ahead of its time has sort of created this, the ability to shop in a way that is almost like a search. And I think that's it's rich and it feels very, sort of multi-layered. So in the United States, I would say, and this goes back to my sort of adaptive reuse, there's RH, formerly Restoration Hardware, in the Gold Coast in Chicago, that took over, I think, an old maybe women's club or in sort of a historic building, and I think has done a spectacular job not only of sort of creating a space that feels like it belongs a little bit to the city, but also just shows their goods off in a way that's incredible. And ultimately, that's what you want. Both the Liberty of London, you want people to sort of find that beautiful, perfect thing that they didn't know that they wanted. And in the Chicago example, it's sort of feeling like you're in a space that is extremely comfortable and extremely sort of free to sort of spend time in the space. It's more like a bunch of living rooms, essentially.
Fascinating. Yeah, they certainly knew what they were doing. The old school models in a lot of cases. And speaking of the opposite, new school, Chris, your mention of malls in Asia, because we keep talking about the death of malls, but in Asia, I don't think that's happening anytime soon, because they've really, in my opinion, I've spent some fair amount of time there, kind of nailed this idea of malls as community centers, especially with eating. Like the eating areas, and like usually in the basement, are so full always and so amazing that I think that they seem to unlock some sort of secret. Singapore, you go from one mall to the next, to the next, to the next, eating at these food courts, and just moving, and they really are like incredibly vibrant places. So I think it is important to mention that it's not just a uniform death of the mall. Maybe the ones that were poorly conceived in the United States, but some of the other ones are doing quite well.
Totally, but they do have also a much more urban context than the kind of
Right.
in the US.
Right,
And
those are smack in the middle.
happens a lot in the mall. That's yeah. Also, even the project in Korea. I mean, it's a department store, but it also has these F&B floors, indeed in the basement, but also on level 9. There's cinema, there's a cultural center. There is other program than just purely the retail space. Yeah. So it's basically a day out for a family.
Yeah, to me, it's all about the eating. And then our next question is, how have your shopping habits changed since the pandemic, if at all? Sean, maybe you should go first this time.
My personal shopping habits?
Yeah.
I've given in to the, it's this, oh gosh, it's addictive, right? I mean, you get on your phone, you find that, I ordered some nail files. So it's like an item that costs $2, and it somehow arrived at my house in a box the next day. And the sort of the cringeworthiness of that took a box and a truck to bring me nail files sort of has changed my thinking about that completely. So I would say in the last 9 months, I've sort of had a high of how many boxes can you get, and how looking down the street to really questioning that, and again sort of going back to the ridiculous nature of what a lot of e-commerce currently is.
Chris?
Yeah, well, a little bit the same for me. I'm also obviously, yes, we have ordered more by e-commerce, but when you see the numbers of packages that are returned to those shops, I think it's also crazy. I mean, we have all those kind of trucks driving around day and night. People just return it. Trucks drive back and forth again. I'm very critical about what I buy, and actually, I think that is kind of a good trend. So buy less, and I think there's many good reasons to do that. And I have not been a lot in shops. I think for a while most shops were closed here. Then they opened again. It's still a bit with so many people not really kind of taking care of social distance and so on. My appetite of shopping is a lot less, let's say.
If I could say one more thing, there's a store in Oakland, California that has a placard outside that says "Buy fewer, better things," and I think that's sort of been my mantra for really a long time. Buy fewer, better things is really, I believe, not only is that sustainable, but that's also, you feel better about the purchase when it's going to last maybe through the rest of your life, perhaps.
So an old school way of looking at it. I like it. I really like it.
So, when you do shop in a physical place, do you like to do it in a high street or a shopping center? Chris?
Oh, me. I never go to shopping malls. I mean, that's the interesting thing also designing it, because I basically take myself as an example. Would it be attractive enough for me to kind of go there?
That's why your mall doesn't look like a mall.
Yeah, that's right. Sean, what about you?
I like the boutiques, the kind of the streets. Let's say the small terraces outside. I mean, the bad weather. That is kind of going for shopping, and going just to a mall. Everything is so conditioned, and no, not for me.
Sean, by the way, Prathima said High Street, but in the U.S. we would say Main Street.
Yeah, I was going to say I grew up on High Street, so I have a certain affection for that. And so, honestly, I'll take it one step further. I love really ad hoc retail. I love a scrappy retailer that's gone into a really strange space. I find that the creativity that brings out in both in the merchandising and in the how they present themselves to the street, I always find it's so much more interesting in a lot of ways than what you expect from a perfect little storefront that's showing you everything that they sell. So I would have to say not just high streets but alleys. I mean, I find that sort of the European model of finding something you might want to buy is so much more gratifying and worth the steps than a mall, or than sort of the boutique row that kind of has, like Chris said, 2 Versace's and 3 Louis Vuittons.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
the thing of also exploring and finding things you didn't per se were looking for. I think that's the experience is interesting, and that's the experience that I think will also remain. But it will be one of the many kind of parallel shopping experience or retail experiences that we will find in the city. So.
And I think one of the things that will probably will be great to see come back is local brands and local experiences. And just kind of thriving local economies, because I mean, I think all of us are really getting bored with this same brand, global brands, which are there in every city, neighborhood. Yeah. So it'd be
I
nice
think
to
that's
see
where technology hopefully so the question that Sam asked, we've been talking about maker spaces for a really long time, and it's all, it sounds great. It has always felt a little dreamy, to use a strange word. I think that and has the potential to actually add that layer of entrepreneurship and that sort of discovered object that we're talking about. And technology has gotten to the point where people can actually have a dream and create that object or that thing you're going to wear on their own without having to go through a global supply chain
and not have to charge a fortune. They can compete with
exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So the last quickfire question I'm going to participate in. Do you guys both have writing pads or anything that you can write on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Prathima, do you want to ask? Since I guess I'm drawing, so I shouldn't ask it.
Okay. Draw a transformative retail space.
Sorry, what?
Transformative retail space.
Transformative transformative retail space. Very, very big question.
And while you do that, I'm going to say hi to the amazing audience that joins us from around the world, actually. Thank you so much for staying with us throughout this conversation. Please let us know where you're from. And if you do have any questions for Sean or Chris, please share it in the video link below, and we'll try to take a few of them. And, and continue to stay in touch with us. Please hit the like or subscribe button. And you will continue to receive updates and notifications on future episodes. And we'd love to hear from you all about what your thoughts are on disrupting retail or future of retail. So please share your thoughts with us. We have a comment here by Juan Fernando Jaramillo Vintimilla. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. And he says, I believe European cities have succeeded creating and mostly maintaining this urban retail experience of keeping lots of stores, restaurants, gyms, or any other kind of retail aimed service in city centers or downtowns. And I guess that's been crucial to their success as well. And I hope we can learn from some of those European cities that we all love. So yeah, please share your comments or thoughts with us.
Should I go first this time so I make their drawings look really good?
Yeah, Sam, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I think I've reached a new low, just so you know.
Wait.
Anyway, so my idea is that.
Okay, I'm gonna zoom in on that.
Yeah.
What is this?
If you try to guess, you won't. But it's the shopping forest.
It's what?
A shopping forest. So it's sort of like I sort of drawing on a Victorian kind of magic of going through the forest and discovering things. So those trees, the first level is a bunch of trees. You think you're walking through the forest, but there's little holes. There's these little areas where you kind of go into the hole and then you burrow your way down, almost like Alice in Wonderland, into the stores which are underground. you take a passageway or a stair or a chute or something. So it's sort of the magic of discovering things as you're going through the forest and you go down into the store. So that's
wow. Okay, that's great.
And
very
better than
Okay, shall I go next?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I have a bit more traditional view. Well, this is, can you see? Yeah, so this is the city. A variety of different typologies mixed together, from pavilions, Amsterdam houses, department stores, etc. I think this is able to transform because you have all these different conditions very well. So that is my contribution.
I love the eclecticness of it. It really has a lot of energy to it. I also saw your mall in there from Korea. It was in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
The hypermix. Oh, Sean.
I like the hypermix.
So, whoops. So mine is really just kind of a little bit of a diagram. So again, let's go back to that, sort of sea of parking in a single use, and then below is sort of a tapestry that we would hope to see these sites, these 100+ acre sites, turned into it someday. And that's kind of richness and the open space and all of the things that, all the things that you want to see in an environment.
I love it. I'd love to see that image, every square inch of concrete we have, be transformed into something interesting like that. Imagine that.
There's a lot.
We have a lot of palette to work with.
We do.
Thank you both for being the sport and indulging both of us. It's always fascinating to see these quick sketches, and please send it to us. We are kind of collecting all of them, and hopefully we'll make something of it in the next year or so. Maybe we can take one audience question. We have a few coming in. We have one from Giovanni Barragan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right again. He's asking us, how can town planning, urban planning policies facilitate better retail experiences in the city? Anyone want to respond to that?
I'll give you my take on that, and it is that space needs to be much cheaper. I think that the value of retail space is so much more than a per square foot rent, that if there's a sort of a de-emphasizing greed and looking at what that adds to your project and to the city first, rather than sort of what kind of rent you can get.
Can that mean retail rent control? Is that one way to do that?
I think yes, but on a much more sort of micro level, I think that a developer can just, rethink their pro forma and rethink the allocation of funds and give away space. I know that's verboten, but give away space in order to create a more rich environment. I think that's the future, the near-term future for a lot of urban projects that are probably going to struggle pretty mightily with attracting retailers. But the innovation and the entrepreneurship that I hope to see in the next 10 years, we really need cheaper, easier, more flexible space.
So by getting less greedy, they're actually more likely to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. You're making money somewhere else. I mean, I think that's the American way, right? So if you can just transfer that thought to maybe a slightly different framework, I think that's easily doable. We could start tomorrow with that.
Chris, thoughts on policy ideas for better retail?
Maybe something like a city curator or retail curator. It's like making a larger kind of master plan based on opportunities and qualities, rather than only let the market kind of work with their kind of own, let's say, independent business model and so on, so that you can really kind of group certain types of retail and experience, and in a way that is happening sometimes. I think in Rotterdam, I see that happening, that certain streets are kind of upgraded, kind of the whole street, so that also the kind of the retail development is further encouraged to invest in it. And I think that is a good way to make a more sustainable retail urban experience work.
So it's almost like a leasing agent for a city. I love that idea. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And that should be not only kind of done by the market parties, also not only done by the governments. There should be creative forces also involved in that.
Absolutely, love it.
Sounds like we need more creative. Every time we do this, I realize we need more creative people working on policy as well.
Yeah,
It's true.
that can be a game changer.
Yeah.
I want to take one more question, and then we can wrap up because we're completely out of time. I recognize that. And Giovanni kind of just commented saying, thanks for the answer. And Australia has one of the highest retail rents in the world. I want to take Anna's question here, who's asking us about unregulated open air markets in developing countries. What are your thoughts on those in the future of public markets and open spaces? And
yeah, that's always kind of a part of this local experience that is so important to keep. I can see that now in Hong Kong, for instance. There you have the Dai Pai Dong. Those are the kind of local street market, street foods. And the policy now in Hong Kong is that you cannot transfer that permit anymore to somebody else. So basically, this is kind of slowly dying out. And that is all for the kind of control of hygiene and et cetera, et cetera. But you can for sure do that also in another way. And it adds so much to the kind of cultural local life. So yes, indeed, a little bit less controlled and a little bit more spontaneous outdoor retail market events. Great.
yeah, they're part of the local experience. Mateo says one good thing with the COVID situation is that we're getting more interested in local experiences like organic food and local products in general. Okay, I'm going to take one. This is my last question, I promise.
Last one. We gotta. Okay.
Yeah. How can developers work with Amazon instead of against them? Are they working against?
That's tough. I mean, I think that the agenda that Amazon has been sort of publicly is, they would love to buy department stores in order to create either, sort of warehousing facilities or fulfillment centers. I would say the way we would work with that is if any place you have people congregating, any place you have people coming to, lots of people coming to a space, there's an opportunity to create an urban experience or to create a active shopping experience. And if that is not what Amazon wants to do, then I think they will fail. I don't think that they can sort of insert themselves into our cities as big boxes and expect that that model is going to be satisfying for anyone. Other than just an exchange of goods, which is much easier to do in other ways. So, I think that much like their sort of headquarters in downtown Seattle has embraced the city, they clearly get it. They clearly understand their workers are largely sort of millennial and younger even that want to have those kinds of experiences. So I think they need to really think hard when they think about their sort of fulfillment centers out in the suburbs, moving closer into our cities. I think they've got to think about how they interface with the street and what are you getting back? You have to give something back to our cities or you don't belong here.
Yeah, and I think it's a model that's kind of indicative of a lot of larger companies. As you get so big, you have such large profits that you start to expect that, and you just have to keep growing. That's the model of corporate world, and that doesn't work if it's like you're not going to be able to make things better if all you need to do is keep growing and growing and growing.
Exactly.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. I want to thank Sean and Chris for spending this time with us. Thank you. And I also want to thank all of you for spending almost 1.5 hours with us on this important conversation. Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, thank you to ArchDaily for spreading the word, and thank you, Sean and Chris. You guys were wonderful guests, and send us your images, your sketches. We'd love to keep those as well. And thanks, Prathima, for co-hosting, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.